Okay, so it is 9:01. I feel like it's a good time to get started. I would like to thank Jenny Stevens for coming and speaking to our Score I community about her most recent book. Jenny Stevens is an educator, social justice advocate, energy expert, and sustainability science researcher. She's a professor and director of the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs at Northeastern University, where she holds leadership roles at the Global Resilience Institute and the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program. Today, she's going to be talking about her book, Diversifying Power, Why We Need Anti-Racist Feminist Leadership in Climate and Energy. A couple of housekeeping things. Jenny's going to speak for about 15-20 minutes, and she's got some slides. After that, we plan to just have an open conversation about these topics. We've been discussing this concept a lot on the Score I listserv in terms of what does leadership look like, what do solutions look like, and which solutions get valued depending on who is in leadership positions. So I really look forward to hearing Jenny talk about her perspective on this. We'd like to ask participants to introduce themselves, maybe name, place, and affiliation in the chat box at the beginning if you feel so inclined. If you don't want to and want to remain anonymous, that's fine too. But if you're interested, please introduce yourself. We are recording the session, just to announce that so everybody knows. And then, of course, throughout the talk, we will be taking questions in the chat and in the Q&A. I'll be monitoring that. And then we'll ask questions at the end. I will be asking people if they would like to unmute themselves to ask their questions. So if you don't want to unmute yourself, indicate that in your question and I won't ask it. I'll just ask the question for you. So with all that said, I will hand it over to Jenny. Welcome, Jenny. Thank you for doing this.
Great. Well, thank you, Ashley. It's great to have a chance to connect with some of the Score I network virtually. So thanks for having me and organizing this session. And thanks to the rest of the Score I board as well. And thanks for all of you for taking an hour out of your day to engage on this topic. So I wrote this book just over the past year or so. It was just released in September, and it's a non-academic book. It's a call to action. It's intended to be inspiring and motivating and encouraging us all to leverage our collective action for transformative change. And the focus on leadership really emerged, from my own experience, which most of my career I've been working on climate and energy issues for the past 20, 25 years, and recognizing that the ideas and policies and practices that are being promoted to address the climate crisis have been much more focused on technological innovation and much less focused on social innovation. And a lot of that, I think, results, we can talk about why that is, but really we need to, and I argue that we really need to center our climate and energy policies on social justice, racial justice, and economic justice. And until we do that, we'll actually continue to be ineffective. So that's an introduction here. And to begin, I thought I'd give a brief introduction to who I am and my interdisciplinary background. Let's see here. I actually am an EU-US dual citizen. I was born in Ireland and moved to the United States when I was 8. I was always interested in environmental science and policy, the interface of science and policy. I got my undergraduate degree in that, and then my graduate degree was more technical in environmental science and engineering. And when I finished my PhD, I knew I wanted to get back to kind of more of the social dimensions of climate. And so did a postdoc really focusing on energy technology innovation policy. I was then a faculty member at Clark University for 9 years. where I was mentored by Helena and Philip in the Score Eye community. And I really there was able to develop a very interdisciplinary academic program focused on social and technical dimensions of energy and climate. I was then at the University of Vermont for 2 years with focused on the renewable energy transition. And I've been at Northeastern now for the past 4.5 years, which is a university in Boston with a focus on kind of experiential learning and connecting research to practice. So that just gives a background of who I am and where I'm coming from. And because the book is really a synthesis of a lot of my own experiences and observations. And I think it's helpful to kind of know where I'm coming from. So I actually start with thinking about the economic injustice in the United States in particular. This is all over the world, but what's happened in the past 4 decades in the United States in terms of the widening income and wealth gap is really important to understand. And not everybody has a full appreciation for how this concentration of wealth and power has been so strategic over the past few decades. And I argue that that is directly connected to how we've been ineffective in climate and energy for several reasons. Particularly, as you see here, the top 1% with both the share of national income and the share of national wealth has been steadily increasing. And a lot of that is really related to the interests of fossil fuel interests, with a category of people that some of us are now referring to as the polluter elite, who are shareholders, wealthy individuals and organizations, CEOs of fossil fuel companies, who have been very strategically investing for decades to resist a transformation away from a fossil fuel-based system toward a more renewable, regenerative society. And they have been investing in several ways, and kind of in discrete and kind of hidden ways that not a lot of us understand how much investments they have made. But specifically, those investments have been a misinformation campaign to deny climate science and confuse us about the realities and the risks of the climate crisis, and the dangers of continuing to burn fossil fuels. They've also been investing in undermining public trust in government and dismantling regulations that are designed to protect us and protect public health. And they've been investing to minimize worker protections and worker rights. And there's really been a cultural shift in corporations away from considering their employees and the health and well-being of their employees, and really prioritizing shareholder interests above all else. So with that background, I think the climate crisis is really a crisis in leadership. And part of that is also because of the way, in part in response to the polluter elite, but the way that climate change has been talked about in isolation of everything else. It's often, climate energy policy are often thought of as like separate from other policies. And we've embraced a pretty narrow technocratic lens to think about climate change, often focusing on decarbonization and greenhouse gas emission reductions, which are important to quantify, of course, and to have goals associated with, but it's not what people wake up every day worrying about, right? And so this climate isolationism has really meant that we've missed all kinds of opportunities for investing and improving the human condition, because we've embraced this very technocratic lens. The other thing is that science, particularly because of education gaps and inequities in our education system, the very scientific and technical way of talking about climate has excluded all kinds of people, because we don't all have equal access to good science education. So an alternative lens that I suggest we should be embracing is this idea of energy democracy, which is a vision of a future that is renewable based and acknowledges that the transformation we have to make from a fossil fuel based society to a renewable-based society is really an opportunity. And it's an opportunity to make broad investments in people and communities. We can base those investments on social justice and human dignity, and really leverage the urgency of the transformation that's required because of the climate crisis to make social justice and social change transformations that are so important for so many other reasons other than the climate crisis. So in particular, the energy democracy framing is really envisioning a renewable-based future. And it's so powerful and revolutionary because when we think about a renewable-based future, we can think about locally controlled, regionally owned and managed and distributed systems that enable self-sufficiency, regeneration. And what's so important is that renewable energy is every place in the world has access to renewable energy, whether it's solar or wind. In coastal communities, we also have wave and tidal and offshore wind. Inland, there's also wind and solar at multiple levels and scales, but also geothermal energy, which we have not harnessed very much of yet. And so there's all kinds of possibilities, and this is why it is really transformative. We can distribute power literally and figuratively as we transform to a renewable-based society. So the book really focuses on leadership because we have very explicit contrasts in different kinds of leadership. And the conventional patriarchal leadership is based very explicitly on domination, exclusion, and competition. And it's all focused on concentrating wealth and power and prioritizing investments to maximize corporate profits, not to be concerned about human well-being. And that sort of leadership exacerbates inequities and racial and gender disparities, and it denies the systemic problems in order to sustain the status quo. Because the people who embrace patriarchal leadership are in power and they want to sustain their power, they systematically deny the problems because it's working for them, even though it's not working for everyone else. So not only are we experiencing a denial of the climate crisis, but we have been experiencing a denial of the dangers of the pandemic. We've been denying that we have an economic crisis, denying that we have a housing crisis, denying that we have a structural racism crisis in the United States. So this denial of problems is a key strategy to maintain and sustain patriarchal leadership. On the flip side, you have anti-racist feminist leadership. And when I mention anti-racist feminist leadership, this is a kind of leadership that anyone can embrace, regardless of your gender or your race or your religion or your cultural or ethnic background. What it means is leadership that acknowledges the structural inequities associated with gender and race and all kinds of other structural issues that discriminate against other people as well. And acknowledge that, and then base your leadership on constantly and continuously considering those structural issues so that we can make policies and practices and processes that are not perpetuating those devastating practices. So anti-racist feminist leadership is based on collaboration, inclusivity, and participation. It is about distributing wealth and power, prioritizing investments for communities and worker rights. It's about reducing inequities and disparities by centering all policies and practices on social justice, racial justice, and economic justice. And it really leverages transformation by linking these problems together, not keeping problems in isolation of each other. And the squad are the 4 junior congresswomen here in the United States who are all non-white women who came on the national stage just 2 years ago, and they dramatically changed the policy discourse at the national level on climate and energy. And they did that by explicitly connecting climate and energy with jobs and economic justice, connecting it with criminal justice and structural racism, and connecting it with the housing crisis and the growing housing insecurity that and the need for investments in public housing in the United States. So what I did in the book is elevate specific examples of leaders who are doing innovative, inspiring, creative things. So the first set of leaders I elevate are leaders who are calling out the polluter elite. And this is really hard work because the polluter elite are very powerful, and they do not want to be held accountable, and they've been getting away with their strategies for decades. And so I devote a chapter to leaders who are explicitly resisting the polluter elite. So Jackie Patterson of the NAACP is one of these leaders. She heads the Environmental and Climate Justice Program at the NAACP. And she and her team have developed a primer on the top 10 manipulation tactics of the fossil fuel industry, and explicitly making this accessible and working with Black communities, in particular in the United States, who the fossil fuel interests have taken advantage of and manipulated to gain support for their fossil fuel projects, even though those communities are often the communities that are most disproportionately negatively impacted in terms of health and other impacts of fossil fuel infrastructure. Another leader that I elevate in this chapter is Jasmine Banks, who is the leader of Uncoke My Campus, which is an organization that reveals the influence of the Coke network on universities, but also on the court system. And another leader is Maura Healey, who is the Attorney General here in Massachusetts, who has been using her power as the people's lawyer to sue ExxonMobil in the Massachusetts law for consumer protection, saying that they are claiming their products are green, but they are in fact not. So the next chapter focuses on leaders who are thinking about connecting climate energy with jobs and economic justice. Varshini Prakash, the co-founder and one of the leaders of Sunrise Movement, which is the youth movement that has been connecting jobs and economic justice with climate, who obviously worked closely and had a big influence and influenced by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in terms of developing the proposal for the Green New Deal. And then there are several leaders who I focus on that are really focusing on economic training for workforce development with the renewable energy transition. So Erica Mackey of Grid Alternatives is an organization that is doing solar installation in communities that have been under invested in, and then also involves training workers from those communities in solar installation. Esteban Kelly, who's the head of U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. He's been really connecting the possibility for worker-owned cooperatives in the energy sector. And Rowena Altmos, who's the leader of All In Energy, who has been advocating and elevating the fact that our energy efficiency policies and jobs have been disproportionately not going to communities and individuals from underinvested in communities as well. So she's been working on workforce training and energy efficiency and weatherization in terms of jobs. So all of these people are resisting the precarity, economic precarity that we have become so complacent to, and they're reclaiming the possibilities of public investment and really focusing on restructuring for a much more inclusive prosperity. The next chapter is about health, well-being, and nutritious food for all, and elevating leaders in this space. Robert Bullard is often considered the father of environmental justice, among the first leaders to do research to demonstrate how how Black communities in particularly were being disproportionately exposed to toxics and fossil fuel infrastructure. Mildred McLean of Hurrenby House Citizens for Environmental Justice is one among many Black women that have been saying we are sick and tired of being sick and tired. Gina McCarthy was the administrator for the EPA under the Obama administration. She's currently the head of NRDC, and she has been advocating to connect climate and health as a public communication strategy for a long time, and that we haven't been doing that well enough. Although currently several communities and municipalities have actually declared the climate crisis a public health emergency more recently. Jillian Heshaw is a lawyer and an advocate for Black farmers and connecting climate with food and farming and agriculture. Mustafa Santiago Ali was at the EPA in their environmental justice program and is now at the National Wildlife Federation. And he's been an advocate for Black communities in particular and the disproportionate impacts of climate on Black communities. And Dorcetta Taylor is the researcher currently at Yale who elevated and did research describing how white the environmental community has been in the United States and how that whiteness has led to a disproportionate lack of focus on the health impacts because of the disparities in who's involved has influenced the agenda of the environmental community. And I mentioned here Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand, the Prime Minister, who, like several other countries led by women, have been among the most effective in managing the coronavirus crisis. And along with Taiwan, Germany, and Denmark, other countries that have been managing the pandemic, it seems like this kind of leadership of taking decisive evidence-based action and then communicating with empathy and compassion why the strict measures are necessary in a trusted way is very effective. And this same kind of leadership is really what we need more of with climate and energy as well. Transportation, of course, is a critical part of the climate and energy story. And we have a lot of the transportation discussions in the environmental community have been on, electric vehicles and other modes. Obviously, within SCORI, a lot of people are thinking more broadly about social change as well. But really, some of the key leaders, Representative Ayanna Pressley, who's my congresswoman here in Massachusetts, she has really focused on transit justice and the equity issues associated with our transportation systems and all the possibilities for innovation when we focus when we focus and center our transportation policies with social justice. Michelle Wu is also she's a Boston City Councilor, and she's running for mayor now in Boston. And she has proposed a Green New Deal for Boston, which includes free transportation, free public transportation. So making the MBTA, the city's buses and subway free. And this is a radical proposal in a sense for the conventional leadership, but when you think about equity and justice issues and the disproportionate costs of riding the subway for low-income households, you can see that the possibility of providing free transit is not it makes a lot of sense in so many ways. Another innovative leader in transportation, obviously, is Greta Thunberg, who when she was traveling to North America last year for the international climate conferences, she traveled by sail, wind-powered boat rather than air travel. The final chapter elevates leaders who are connecting climate and energy with housing. And Representative Ilhan Omar, one of the members of the squad, has really been elevating the need for investment in housing in the United States, and we have such a housing crisis. Some leaders women leaders in Oakland, California, established an organization called Moms for Housing, which is advocating for housing to be a human right. And these women, they're 4 mothers who were homeless and housing insecure, and they occupied a vacant building, home in Oakland. And when they were evicted, the authorities sent literally tanks and military personnel and guns to evict these women from the house that they had been occupying, and they leveraged that experience into an organization that's been advocating for, you know, major transformative policy changes with regard to housing. And the last example here is some Indigenous women in Canada, the tiny house warriors that are who are using their own connection with their land as their home to resist the trans-regional pipeline going across Canada, fossil fuel pipeline. And their homes, their tiny houses are on wheels, and they can move the homes to block the building of the pipeline. So it's a protest associated with housing. So I will end there and just say that the final chapter is, and the goal of the book is really a call to action, as I mentioned, and really to encourage all of us to leverage our collective power for transformation. We are all leaders, not just elected officials are leaders. We're all leaders in our organizations, in our communities, in our families. And we need to be acting to inspire new leadership and advocating for system change, and getting beyond incremental steps at this point. We really need larger transformation, and we need to be understanding and unlearning racism and sexism and talking about racism and sexism so that we are able to center social justice and racial justice and at the core of the initiatives that we're advocating for. And obviously lots of opportunities for local community renewable energy and leveraging data science and information for change, supporting cooperatives and other novel economic structures. And I know many in the SCORI community are very interested in that. And you know, the United States in particular is in such a divided time right now. I think one way we can get around that is, and I mentioned Mary Robinson, an international leader in climate justice, is really thinking about a people-centered approach. What do people need? How can we make investments and prioritize what people and families and households need? And when we are able to do that and communicate that, it seems less controversial and radical. And I'll finally just honor Shirley Chisholm, who was the first Black woman to run for president in 1972. And she, you know, in some ways we've come a long way since 1972, and in other ways, really not as far as many of us might have hoped or thought we could. And I'll end there, and I'll just mention that all author proceeds from the book do go to NAACP's Environmental and Climate Justice Program to continue to support and advance the great work that they are doing. So I'll end there, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny. That was super great. So many amazing leaders that you mentioned there. So it makes me very hopeful and excited about the potential. I will start by asking Helena if she would like to ask her question out loud. I'll give her a second to see if she wants to. Helena, are you there? Oh, there she is. Oh, wait, hold on. You have to unmute it, Helena.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Ashley. Sorry for my wet hair, didn't have time. I wrote a question, a specific question in the chat box, but before I get to that question, I have a broader question, Jenny. These are terrific leading women, but we could probably present a similar list of amazing leaders for social justice that are male. So tell me why you put your faith more in these women leaders than men leaders. I know you started your talk by saying that those who are right now in power are mostly men. Okay, but that doesn't change the fact that the change could come from and the challenge to the existing system could come from all kinds of people. So where is it? Where is the hook that it's the women that are more likely to change things around?
Okay, so there are two answers to two responses I'd like to elevate. One is anti-racist feminist leadership is for everybody, men and women, people of any race. You can embrace this kind of leadership. So feminist leadership doesn't mean women only, right? We have many men leaders who are feminist leaders, right? So we have to separate, and we have women leaders who you wouldn't associate with feminist, right? So I think that's really important to acknowledge. Anti-racist feminist leadership is a kind of leadership that is not about who you are necessarily, but it's about what you prioritize. The other piece that is really important is the representation and the distinction of who is at the table in the leadership spaces. Because when women, people of color, indigenous people are given a seat at the table in places where they've been historically excluded, they are able to bring very different life experience, very different perceptions of risk. There's research that shows risk perceptions of white men in the United States are white men think everything is less risky than women do and people who are not white. So we know that when women, people of color, and indigenous folks are in leadership positions, they bring different life experience, different perception of risk, and therefore a better ability or a different capacity to center social justice, racial justice, economic justice at the core of the policies. And what we have experienced for so long is that when people and policies are made without considering social justice, racial justice, and economic justice, we end up with policies that exacerbate the inequities and disparities, right? And that's happened across the board with so many of our policies, even, good policies that have accelerated solar panels, for example, right? They've gone, the benefit and the incentives have all gone to more well-off households and families and communities, and that just exacerbates the inequities. So what we need is the opposite of that. We need at every single decision and policy and process and practice, we need people to understand and embrace and center social justice at the core, or else we will just keep perpetuating. So I think that's the real argument. And I'm not calling for, only women leaders. The argument is diversity, right? You need to be inclusive, you need to allow different voices, and you need to listen and learn from different people's experiences that they bring.
Okay, thank you. But still, you presented only women leaders in your book.
There were a few men. Robert Bullard, Esteban Kelly.
Yeah, Bullard. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to call Ashley on others, or shall I go on with my other question?
Well, I actually kind of had a follow-up question related to this topic. So let me ask that, and then we'll get to other questions. That's okay with Helena. Okay, so I was thinking along similar lines, and this is, I hope I'm communicating this with the nuance that I intend to communicate it with. But I think there is some, you're right about the divisiveness in the US right now. So like thinking about this cultural divide between elites who tend to be in these powerful positions, and then, sort of like the people who need to have their needs met, who aren't being advocated for. We're thinking about trying to get people who hold this maybe alternative point of view that isn't technocratic, that isn't this old boys club, that isn't this techno fix perspective into the conversation about, actually having power in solving these problems. However, a lot of those people are, I'm going to try to make this faster. A lot of those people are maybe put off by words like anti-racist and feminism. you know what I mean by that?
Yep.
So then, like, how do you navigate this dichotomy between this, like, it's obvious to me that you need like a collaborative perspective to solve this problem, and you need intellectual diversity, but sometimes there are cultural markers that put people off from getting involved in the conversation because they're like, you know, they're ideological to them. So I don't know, maybe you could speak to that, like balancing these two things, the label and then, you know, inclusivity.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ashley. Great question. And I think, you know, I wrote this book very explicitly trying not to be antagonistic to white men and trying explicitly to be welcoming and encouraging of white men, and not just and white people, right? Because we do have a culture of white supremacy, right? And we are increasingly aware of this now, but even this word white supremacy, people are like scared about, right? They feel I'm not a white supremacist, but we're not talking about individuals. We're talking about a culture and a system whereby for so long, so many of our policies have been very explicitly giving privilege to white people, right? From everything from housing to food to education to like across jobs, economic, like so banking across the space. So we have to acknowledge that. But you're right, in the moment, not everybody is comfortable acknowledging that. And there's a lot of defensiveness, and it takes time for people to be comfortable acknowledging that. And so I think I've chosen in the book to be very explicit about let's all try to be anti-racist feminist leaders. Like I'm not ashamed of that, right? I would welcome and encourage everyone to think about that. But you're right, not everybody's going to raise their hand and sign up for that. And feminism itself obviously has a long historical reality that different people have felt alienated or frustrated or different ways of thinking about what is even feminism, and people think about each of these ideas from their own perspective and their own experiences. So I think this is part of the conversation that we need to have. And you're right that not everybody some people will be automatically shut down as soon as they hear those words, right? And I think there are ways to talk about all of these issues without using those words. In a book that's meant to be kind of provocative and engaging, I think it works. But you know, for depending on different audiences and as you said, the big cultural divide, I think there are lots of opportunities, again, of just centering people and a people's first approach. Like, what do people need? And it's not about men or women or the race, but it's just thinking about what do people need and how can we be investing in our communities and our families and our children for the next generation in ways that provide those basic things. So yeah, I mean, I could go on, but that's the general response I would have to that.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to briefly say I took part in a dissertation research of political psychologist in college who talked about the differences between attitudes and identities. And attitudes are like, I don't think we should, raise forests, and identities are environmentalist. And when you have this identity, it's like, can sometimes be this trigger for people like, oh, I'm not an environmentalist, but, I agree that we should have conservation and biodiversity and,
Exactly.
So maybe just speaking more on the level of attitudes might be able to pull people in more so than identities. That's been my experience, at least. I have a question here, Helena, I'll get back to you, I promise, but I don't see who it's from. It doesn't have a name, but I'm just going to read it. Jenny, could you tell us a little more about how the book and its key messages are being received in those spaces of power and expertise that you're trying to intervene and change the practices of?
Yeah, thank you. So the book came out in September. So the past few months, I've been, talking to different groups, all virtually, giving talks, I've been on some radio shows, I've been on different podcasts and interviews, and I think people are, so many people are, I mean, it's such a hard time of suffering and fear and uncertainty right now around the world. I think the positive kind of inspiring collective approach and message, I think, is being well received, by people who appreciate and are looking. I mean, so many of us are looking for what we can do and how we can, make a difference in creating the world a better world for everyone. And so in that respect, I think it's been very well received, and I've been giving, it's been personally just gratifying to have something productive to talk about in the past few weeks, few months. And I think one of the people that I talk to who have the hardest time getting the understanding, I think, are some people who've been working on these issues in a more conventional sense for a long time. And I had one colleague who, heard my talk and wanted to talk more because said he still didn't really understand the connection. He's a climate expert and with a very technocratic perspective on what should be done. And so I suggested, he asked if we could talk more, and I suggested, well, why don't first step, I spent a lot of time trying to synthesize and explain these ideas. So first step, why don't you read the book? And then after you read the book, if you want to come and, we can talk more, that works. So, so anyway, I think, I don't know if, conventional patriarchal leaders are probably not reading the book, right? So that's probably not the target audience, but I'm hopeful that the messages and the ideas about centering social justice at the core of everything will resonate.
Helena, are you interested in asking your question now?
Yes, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ashley. So my question is this: one of the key messages that we need to convey out there is that climate protection also means less consumption. And I don't mean just turning off the lights, but just redesigning our aspirations in terms of lifestyles. And it's very difficult to give that message to low-income communities who have actually been under-consuming for a long time in some respect. So my question is, have you talked about this with your interviewees? And if so, what is their reaction to the idea of less consumption or different consumption?
Yeah, I mean, I think consumption patterns are a consequence of the structures and the choices that people have, right? And when we talk about low-income communities or communities and households that have been underinvested in and have very few choices and are making, surviving and not, under very difficult situations, I think focusing on consumption is not that it won't resonate, right? Like, it's, as you said, people are under consuming. They don't have enough of what they need. So no, I haven't. So I think that's like so I guess when I interviewed people and the examples of the leaders in the book, I asked them, what are you what are you working on? How are you doing? I didn't try to, I was learning from them. I wasn't trying to connect or put forth any specific agenda that wasn't coming from them. So I didn't explicitly ask about consumption, but I think, in terms of our I think it comes down to thinking about the kinds of choices that people have, and again, acknowledging in our system, there's so few. There are some places where we can make individual choices that are different, that can have an impact, and what we really need is bigger structural change, so that the choices that we have are leading to more sustainable and prosperous future for everybody. So that's kind of my response there.
Thank you.
Jenny, I have thanks Helena. I have Vicky is raising her hand. I'm gonna ask her if she would like to ask her questions herself.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you so much. I look forward to reading the book. I'm particularly interested, I think, in the ideas of people making that shift towards centering people who have been marginalized into the core problems of inequality and social inequities in the center of their work, and what that looks like, and what that kind of how that thinking has shifted for them. I'm interested in those examples. But I was also very curious in that by presenting people who are representative of different communities, which I think is really important, and looking to that idea as, you know, these are individual leaders, and kind of what I think a lot of our the questions that we're facing is, how do we shift from a more individual towards a more collective thinking, and or more communal thinking, or community-centered thinking. And so this has come up recently with regard to looking at the people who have kind of made progress towards turning some more conservative areas towards progressive ideas. For example, Stacey Abrams is being cited, but then there are many people who are pushing back and saying, well, it wasn't just Stacey Abrams that was doing this work, you know. How do we lift up, you know, the communities that are doing this work, particularly, I think, with the need to start building capacity and capabilities, and to having them do that leadership building themselves. So, and I just want to end also saying, if you might have any reflections on the idea of, you know, that there's only one right way to behave here. And I think that goes along with our hyper individualism. We have people who speak very vocally, again, with, you know, speaking truth to power. There are some people who work with reform for me. And I mean, it depends, could be dependent a lot on your, not only your life perspectives, but where you're coming from in terms of an intellectual tradition or the theories that you're engaging with. So basically, I was wondering the value you might see, again, in thinking about collective leadership versus individual leadership, and how do we make that shift as well?
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. A great question. And I think one of the things is that many of the leaders that I highlight are coalition builders. They are community leaders. They are grassroots leaders. They are building, and I think part of the reason they're so effective and powerful is because of their collective thinking and collaborative approach. So I think, and what we're seeing right now, especially you know, during this time of the pandemic with so much disruption, new coalitions are forming, and people are realizing that the different problems are connected, right? And that you know, the Sunrise Movement collaborated very closely with Black Lives Matter activists this summer, and new multiracial, multi-generational coalitions are coming together and collaborating in new and different ways. So again, I'm quite inspired by that. We don't read about it in the mainstream media because we have such a, you know, well, there are lots of reasons, but also many of us are unaware of what's going on in our communities and what's going on around us, right? Because we've lost a lot of our mechanisms for local and regional media. So I think that's also a role of this book, is just elevating. I mean, there are all these amazing people and amazing organizations that doing all kinds of things. And because of the fear, I think, that a lot of people have felt, people have been divided very intentionally by other kind of leadership, right? That is trying to keep us to prevent and resist the collective action that we have power to. So I think that's definitely a very important question that you raise, and definitely a core piece of also what anti-racist feminist leadership is all about. It's about the collective, and it's about focusing on collaboration and coalition building and capacity building. And that's when, as I said, when I talk about leadership, I'm not talking about elected officials. I'm only, right? Obviously elected officials are important, but I'm talking about all of us. We are all leaders in our own way. And it's also not a type. This is not a how-to book, one size fits all, how to be a leader. As you mentioned, we're all bring different skills, different experiences, different backgrounds. And how we show up as a leader in our communities, in our families, in our organizations it's the diversity of that leadership that is also really powerful. And so it's definitely not a trying to advocate for a certain type of or kind of action of collective leadership and action.
Excellent, thanks. I'm going to call on Paula next to ask her question.
Oh, hi, thank you. Thanks for the very inspiring presentation. And I'm afraid I have a kind of an how-to question, but I'll reframe it now. It is about, so if you might share your experience on how we can open up our communication as scientists to make it more inclusive, to make it more accessible and more attractive for diverse groups, because I realized that even for me in my career pathway, I just by coincidence became an energy researcher. So I'm a social scientist, and I think if you'd asked me like 10 years ago, I wouldn't have told you I'm particularly interested in energy transitions. It was just coincident that I get into contact with that topic and realize that it's about much more than just the tech part of that. So I would just be interested to learn a bit more about your experience with that. In addition to that, obviously, the book is very helpful.
Yeah, so I think with energy in particular, paying more attention to the inequities and the power dynamics and the, who's being included and who's being excluded from the decision making and from the processes and from the policies as they're designed as well, or like the initiatives or whatever it is, whatever space you're exploring. So as one of the things that, again, I've realized from my own career working in energy for a long time now, going to the energy conferences where they're mostly men, the handful of women in the 200 or 300 people conference, we would get to know each other and, sit together at lunch and talk. And we realize we are actually seeing some of these issues differently because of our experience and maybe because of our different set of priorities. And so even the science that gets done is being determined by the people who are in the scientific fields, right? So that's a call to why we need to diversify at every level and make sure that our scientific processes and scientific training is open and inclusive to people with different life experiences, so that we will be the science itself will be inclusive and exploring a broader range of perspectives and agendas, right, that are actually formed by that. So I think we all have a role to play in recruiting and reassessing what we're each doing in our own scientific endeavors, and then also adjusting and thinking about the degree to which our own research is considering and broader perspectives than what has been kind of conventionally considered in our disciplines.
Paula, I just want to give you the opportunity if you have anything else to add or response.
Hey, thanks for the inspiring answer. I was just thinking, is there any network that you would know of from female energy researchers? Because I've been looking for something like that, and I've only found it so far on an industry level, and that were exactly the companies I do not want to work with. So all
yes,
the
yes, I'm part of several networks of women in energy. There's here in the Northeast of United States, there's the New England Women in Energy and Environment group, but there's also WISER, which is a Women in Energy Research, WISER, you can Google it, which is more of an academic network of women doing energy research in academia. So keep looking, there are networks, and I think that's a really important part of this work. It is hard to be one of the only few doing work in a certain area, and networking with others is really important. So yeah, thank you for asking that question, and also follow up with me, and I can help connect you if you'd like with some others too.
I will give Manisha the floor now, and then I'll get to you, Philip.
Hi, thank you, Jenny, for this really interesting talk and your important interventions in this field. My question is, what do you think in terms of training, when we teach and talk about energy, climate in graduate programs across the country? I mean, as far as I'm aware, while there have been more efforts to bring in a need to focus on questions of structural inequities as they intersect with race, class, and gender, this is not yet a primary part of the training of many of the people who go into leadership positions. So if you were to make recommendations to graduate programs, I guess in addition to reading your book, where do you think that, what needs to change? What sorts of reforms should academic programs put in place to make sure we're training leaders who can actually speak to and feel empowered to act on these issues?
Yeah, great question, Manisha. And there's a lot of work to be done for sure. I think there is a growing recognition of climate justice and energy justice, becoming more mainstream in the vice presidential the last presidential debate of the U.S. candidates before the election. The facilitator even asked the two candidates about environmental racism question, right? Like about how they would respond to families who live close to and worried about their health because they live close to a industrial facility. So I think there is a mainstreaming of the awareness of environmental justice, climate justice, and energy justice issues. Having said that, as you pointed out, in our academic programming, many places have very little, I think. And so I think all of us who are involved and engaged can integrate into our own classes and our own teaching more of a concerted an effort to center social justice and issues of distribution of who's being included and excluded and harmed and burdened and versus benefiting and profiting. So all of these issues can be integrated, and I think we all have a responsibility to do that. I also think many universities are trying to elevate, particularly acknowledge the structural racism in this country. I know my own university is at a very high level committed to making some bigger changes. So I think we can, we're talking about starting an anti-racist leadership program, training program within our school, and so I think there's a lot of space here for innovation, and I think we all can get involved in doing that, and it's essential also for broadening the conversation to be more inclusive, as well as leading to better policies in the future. So great question, Manisha. Thank you.
Jenny, sorry, I just want to give you one more question. If you can go a tiny bit late, I'm going to ask Philip to ask his question.
Okay, so hi Jenny and everybody. So Jenny, great presentation, very inspiring, very important in this time. So I wrote my question in the chat box about the word leadership. And you partially answered it as a response to Vicky, but the word leadership makes me a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe I'm in the Netherlands, close to Germany, where the word for leader is Führer. And so I was wondering if we and also people are inclined to follow new leaders, right? And we should, and you partially answered it because you were talking about new coalitions, creating more collaboration and collectiveness and capacity building. And so I was thinking of terms like teachers or guides, or what else did I write up here? Trailblazers instead of leaders. So thanks.
Well, I think we have a problem of people feeling disempowered, right? So I think elevating that we are all leaders is actually a powerful, you know, framing. So I think that's the perspective that I've brought to this, and I think people want to feel empowered and feel that they are a leader in whatever way you define that. So, and I think that's also where putting the anti-racist feminist before the word leader, you know, kind of suggests, okay, you're talking about a different kind of leadership. You're not talking about an authoritarian leader. You're talking about a very explicitly collective, collaborative leader who's thinking about these structural inequities and disparities at the forefront. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, well, we are over by 3 minutes, so I don't want to waste any more, or not waste, I don't want to take any more of your time. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to speak about your book today. I think this conversation is so essential. I think we need to continue to talk about these issues and think about how exactly this different paradigm can be as inclusive as possible. I think that's really key. And yeah, so I just want to thank you. And yes, the video it has been recorded. It will be uploaded probably within a few days. When it does, I'll share that around for everybody to see and use in their classes. And Jenny, I don't know if you want to just have the final word.
Yeah, well, just thank you so much. And it's great to have this conversation. And I look forward to continuing the conversation with many of you in different forums as well. So thank you. Thank you, Ashley, for facilitating.
Yeah.
Can I just make the announcement for the next webinar, maybe?
Oh, yes, please do.
I have to quickly look into my agenda. It will be Georgios Kallis from the Degrowth Movement. And he will speak to us on December 14th, which is a Monday at the same time. So please communicate to everybody who wants to listen to him. Georgios Kallis.
Excellent. Join us then, everybody. Thanks again. Have a good one.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.